Hello, welcome back to the Nine Sports Podcast, Hockey Edition. I'm your host, Maya Smith, and for the first time ever, we are going to have a new champion in the PWHL. Minnesota was defeated by Montreal on Tuesday night, and so we will have a new champion, and it will be Canadian champion, and we're going to talk all about that today. Today, I am joined by Melissa. She does pretty much everything at the Ice Garden, but right now, filling in for the Ottawa beat writer position, along with the Toronto one, and just keeping everyone organized. So, welcome, Melissa.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited that you're here. So we do have a lot that we need to talk about. We were just saying that there are like so many things happening all at the same time. And we're going to start off with the number one at the nine, your top headline of the week. And we actually have like three headlines all mushed into one because there's been so much breaking news in the last few days. So kicking it off, we have two new expansion teams that have been announced, Vegas and Hamilton. The Las Vegas press conference and announcement was today, but the league also announced the Hamilton one on Thursday when you're listening to this. So both of those are confirmed now. Two new teams. We're expecting probably one more to kind of round out the four that they were predicting. And yeah, so Vegas will be playing at T-Mobile Arena, which is where the Vegas Golden Knights play. And Hamilton will be playing at TD Coliseum, which I was just looking at this, and it's so funny because now we have two TD-related arenas and two Coliseum-related arenas. So we have, it's going to get a bit confusing. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the other thing that happened this week is that the draft list came out. So in the PWHL, players have to declare for the draft. And once you declare for the draft, that means that you can be included in things like reserve players, training camp, rosters, things like that. If you haven't declared, you can't be eligible for those things. So the most declarations since the inaugural season, the players are seeing these expansion teams and getting their name on the list. So we'll talk about that in a little bit here. But let's start with expansion. Vegas, I think, is probably the most shocking of the two. Melissa, I'm interested in your thoughts because there was no takeover tour game there. It really hadn't like been on the radar until a few weeks ago. What do you think about that team?
Yeah, I'm actually writing a piece about this for the Ice Garden. I think the language that I used. Okay, I'm trying to be a little funny here, but it's a gamble for the PWHL to go to Vegas.
Yes.
But I think that it's a smart one because we have Seattle out west. We don't really have anything else out west. I don't consider I consider Minnesota kind of more central or Midwest almost. So you've got to kind of start that, right? Like there's one team out there, but you need more. Vegas really is kind of out of left field, like you said. We really hadn't heard about Vegas, but it kind of seems like the ownership of like the Vegas Golden Knights really wants like all the pro sports in Vegas, and the Vegas landscape wants all the pro sports. So it definitely makes sense in that context. But like you said, yeah, there's never been a takeover tour game. Like there's never been a pro women's hockey game, period, except for there was a rivalry series game in 2022 in Henderson, which is, nearby. So it is like, I think a gamble is kind of a play on words, but it's also accurate because you really don't know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is Vegas going to go all in for women's hockey? Are the fans going to go crazy for it? Or is it just kind of going to be like, no, we have the Golden Knights, we're good. Like maybe we'll go to a game once in a while.
Yeah, that's a great point.
You also think about the WNBA and their success there. So if that's any example, then women's sports and women's hockey will do well there.
For sure. And yeah, they've embraced the Golden Knights, and yeah, as you said, the Aces and their championship winning team now there. I agree with you though. I think like we saw like the discussion, I guess, about travel from both Vancouver and Seattle. And while Vegas isn't necessarily like the closest city to Vancouver, it is in the same time zone and it's not 5 hours away, and you could go there and go back kind of in a good amount of time for both Seattle and Vancouver. So I do think, like, as you said, logistically, they had to start figuring out a way to build out west. And I think some of the things we've been hearing and that other reporters have been saying is that the issue that they've been running into is that the people who own the buildings and subsequently also generally the NHL team that plays in the building, they want to be making money off the PWHL more than just ticket sales, and they want to own the teams. And because the league is a single ownership system right now, that's not possible. And so it does sound like some of the other cities that we have kind of heard mentioned go around, that could be one of the issues, is that the ownership of those cities wanted a bigger stake that the league wasn't willing to offer at this point. And when things are growing as they're growing, it makes sense to want to hold on to it, I guess, if you're the Walter Group. But yeah, really interesting to just kind of go in there blind. I don't think of this as like a slight against the people of Las Vegas when we say like we weren't expecting it at all. I fully believe that there are women's hockey fans all over the place and they'll embrace their team when they get it. But definitely surprising considering some of the other destinations that were on the list: Edmonton, DC, Denver, that kind of thing. And then when it comes to Hamilton, there's been a lot of discussion. It's the third Ontario team. It's not super close to Ottawa, but it's pretty close to Toronto. What are your thoughts about that one?
So I just want to say that I completely did not mention Vancouver when I was talking about Western teams. I only mentioned Seattle, but
I thought you meant the U.S. So
yeah, I was talking about the U.S. And that's why I think, if we ever talk about a San Jose team, that I think that would make sense again, because you're kind of starting to form like a Western conference, like one team out west, two teams out west is kind of like, but once you start getting 3 or 4 teams, it's a conference and it's a little bit more legit. Hamilton, I think, is really interesting. The takeover tour in Hamilton did really well. And I think that makes sense. I know a lot of people aren't crazy about it because of its proximity to Toronto, but I think people who are not in Toronto or in the GTA underestimate how big the GTA is. Like, someone may say they're from Toronto and they may be from like literally 30 minutes away because that's the GTA. There are so many people that live in that area. I think it can support, and clearly the PWHL thinks it can support multiple teams. I think it'll be interesting because right now, if you're a PWHL fan in Hamilton, you've probably been a Scepters fan. Well, now what? Obviously now you're going to be a Hamilton fan, but are you also still going to support the Scepters? But I think it makes sense because, it also reaches that western edge of Ontario better, where you have like Kitchener and Guelph and London, and well, London's a little closer to Detroit now because then we get to talk about Detroit. But I think it just expands the footprint across the other side of Ontario.
Absolutely. And yeah, I've seen anecdotally, obviously, like on Twitter and stuff, but a lot of people saying like some Scepters fans are looking to offload their season tickets that they just purchased now that Hamilton is there. And yeah, where does your loyalty lie, kind of thing. But also exciting for those fans that there is that much, with Detroit, Toronto, and Hamilton, you could be going to games all the time. Like, that's super exciting. And somebody was also saying, and I don't clearly know my Canadian American geography very well, but that it's quite close to Buffalo as well. And that people may come over the border to go to games in Hamilton. I think that's kind of the area that you're in as well. I don't know.
I am in Buffalo. Yeah. I'm in Buffalo. Hamilton is definitely closer than Toronto. Just geographically, it's probably about halfway to Toronto. So it's much closer. I don't know about the public transit situation in Hamilton as much. But I am very familiar with that arena and the location of it and everything right downtown in the city center of Hamilton. I think it's interesting. But it'll be interesting to see what they get in terms of a crowd, and I think it also creates that instant rivalry with Toronto. So it'll be fun to see.
Yeah, it'll be exciting. And I can empathize, being a Western Canadian that's not in BC, with the people who say, but Ontario already has two. Could we maybe go somewhere else? And I get that. I would love if they had moved a little bit outside of that bubble, but I do think like it makes sense in the context of what the situation is, and they did have a really good turnout for the takeover tour game. So why not reward that population and go somewhere where you're going to get some support. So yeah, those two teams, their colors have been released, but of course, like logos and stuff like that, we don't know when we'll see those. Let's quickly touch on the draft. So I believe 200.
Before we go
Yeah.
there, I just, the one thing that I'm thinking about with expansion, because I see so many people talking about it and saying like, well, what the heck? Why are they going to Vegas why aren't they going to XYZ city? Right now it's an either or situation, but that doesn't mean that it's always going to be, right? Like
Absolutely.
that doesn't mean that next year they can't expand again and your city won't get a team. So, I know it stings. And obviously it probably really hurts to see Vegas because there hasn't been a takeover tour game there and everything. But just think about it. It may not be may not be this year, but it might be next year. So
yeah,
hold out that hope.
exactly. There's so much growth to come from this league. Like hopefully we can be saying in 10 years that so many cities have teams. So that's a great point. And speaking of, the expansion and probably having 4 teams, we now see 235 players have declared for the draft, which is the highest since the first season. Some, players we all expected to see there, the 5 gold medalists from the US who are graduating this year, Caroline Harvey, Layla Edwards, and then some European players that were playing at the Olympics as well that have declared. One of the biggest surprises, I think, we were talking about it when the list dropped, is Megan Augusta, who, if you're kind of newer to the sport, she is kind of part of the group that played, before Poulin and Knight came along. And played in the CWHL, and then her last like full-time professional kind of level of play that she played was at the Olympics in 2018. So a long time removed from that part of the game, but she is declared as a forward. Were there any other surprises that you saw, Melissa?
I think the other one that stood out for me was Laura Fortino, who is kind of in a similar situation, hasn't played, pro in North America in several years, but it's kind of like, well, why not, right? Like,
yeah,
there's nothing that can go wrong. You either make it or you don't, and if you don't, you didn't lose anything.
exactly. And I do think, I believe Megan Augusta dropped the puck at the home opener for the Golden Eyes. She's in Vancouver right now. I could see her being, either towards the end of the draft kind of pickup or a reserve player or a training camp player, because somebody in my comments was like, she hasn't played for 8 years. There's no reason to even look at her. But you honestly don't know. Like, she could still have it, or she could have something that your team is looking for to kind of fill that spot. And same with Laura Fortino, although we did just see her at the 2026 Olympics. So there's a little bit more tape on her from, this decade. But what about other exciting players, that maybe or in Europe or in college that you saw that you think would be great?
Yeah, I think there were a bunch of goalies from the Olympics that I thought were really interesting. And again, I think it's kind of like that, well, why not put my hat in the ring? Especially because, you do know expansion's coming and teams are going to be looking for goalies. Even if you're not the starter, like there's nothing wrong with being the backup or even just being a reserve goalie or a third string or whatever. Why not? Like, obviously the money has to be there and everything for you to move overseas, but I think it's really interesting, and who knows who we'll see. But
Yeah.
like you said, it is important because they had to declare really in order to be eligible to play in the league in any way, shape, or form. So even if you don't see them get drafted, it doesn't mean that they can't still play in the league in the future.
Absolutely. And we even saw like Sam Cogan, for example, and she didn't get a ton of ice time when she played in the PWHL, went overseas, came back with Minnesota for this playoffs, and she was huge for them in the playoffs. So you just never know like what opportunity is going to come. So yeah, declaring is important, and I'm really excited if we even get like a couple of those, Olympic goalies. Somebody like Andrea Brandley, who we've watched play at the international level for years, like it would be so awesome to see her in the PWHL. So lots to come on that. We'll have lots of stories and more discussion about that as we get closer. Because right now, the real story is that we're in the finals of the Walter Cup. And it is the Ottawa Charge and the Montreal Victoire facing off in the finals. So I mentioned it kind of in the intro, but Minnesota not going to the finals for the first time in PWHL history. We will have a new champion for the first time in PWHL history and a Canadian champion for the first time in PWHL history. How are you feeling about this matchup first before we get into like how they got here and stuff?
I think it's interesting. Obviously, like Ottawa is the dark horse, the fourth seed, but like they can do it. I mean, Gwyneth Phillips has been lights out, and like Montreal has kind of not been superb. So I think you with not a lot of time off between the end of the semifinal and obviously the final, like Ottawa can take advantage of that and just attack right away.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think like there's no clear front runner here for me. I mean, I think on the polished precision level of things, if Montreal does all of the things right, then they definitely have a chance. But as you said, I don't think Ottawa can be counted out in any shape or form. So Ottawa is in the finals. They beat Boston in 4 games. Montreal beat Minnesota in 5 games. And this is the first time the higher seed going into a matchup has won, which is kind of just insane. And somebody asked about that on the press conference today, with the coach and a player from each team in the finals. Like it, and I think it was Corey Chevry just said, like, that shows the parity of this league, that it doesn't really matter where you come in. If you're in that top 4, you're an elite level team. Where do you think the weak spots were for Boston and Minnesota? Like neither of them was necessarily far away from making the Walter Cup. I mean, Minnesota was like 1 goal away basically. But what do you think was the difference maker in those series?
Yeah, I mean Boston was like 1 goal away too, essentially. Like they lost in double overtime for that last game. And then who knows what would have happened in the 5th game. I think that, playoffs are just such a tight game that it comes down to those little tiny mistakes, like not getting enough pucks on net or not getting the high quality shots, especially with like the goaltending. Obviously, we have some of the top goalies in the world here competing, and now really in the final, we have some of the top goalies in the world competing again. So it really comes down to like those little defensive miscues and just breakdowns where the shots are allowed to get through or a bounce gets through. Those are how the games are won or lost in those little moments.
Absolutely. And I am never one to put any situation on the goalies. In fact, I'm willing to give the goalies the benefit of the doubt, even if they like score on themselves pretty much. But I think when you talk about bounces, like it comes back to that Frankel goal or the goal on Frankel for me. In what I don't know if it was, I think it was game 3. Or maybe it was game 4. Yeah, game 3. Where, the puck is dumped in and a bounce off the boards comes back out. Frankel's not prepared for that and ends up kind of kicking it into her own net. I think that kind of changed the flow of the series so much, just realizing that like, oh, this goalie is not invincible. We know how this rink works. We know this and we can beat her. And I think that's like what you said about the bounces. That's just, it's so true for both teams.
Yeah, I think that, there are things you can control and then there are things you can't control, but you have to take advantage of them anyway. And I think, like you said, you look at going into the series against Boston, like Frankel was so good, but so was Gwyneth Phillips. But like and I know that they were teammates on Team USA and everything, but I think, generally people maybe tend to hold Aaron Frankel in a little higher esteem than Phillips, even though obviously Gwen has done so much and was playoff MVP and everything last year. But you look at, some of the big names on Boston, and it's like, that's intimidating. And how are we going to beat Megan Keller defensively? And once we get past her, then we also have to get past Aaron Frankel. But you do it. And then once you've done it, you're like, oh, we can do it again.
Yeah.
And you find a way, and that's what it's going to come down to in this series too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And somebody asked Anne Renee Desbiens about, like, do you get excited, playing against Phillips? And she was like, every goalie in this league is amazing. It's really not that different to see Phillips in one end versus Rooney. The stats would say something different, but all of these goalies are fantastic. And Maddie Rooney had a really good series, despite my talking down about her for the last couple episodes, especially that 1-0 game that Montreal won in triple overtime. She was so good. But yeah, I think, as you said, it's just about realizing and kind of breaking that momentum that one team might carry. And now both of these teams kind of have that momentum going in. Montreal won for the first time in their history a playoff series and a regulation playoff game, which is kind of crazy. And then Ottawa is going back now with the experience of being there last year and being close, and now knowing that Minnesota is not standing between them and the finals, I think will be quite interesting.
Maddie Rooney clearly watches this podcast and took that personally.
Yes.
And I think going into the final, I think that experience matters. Ottawa having those returning players who went to the final last year, they know what it takes. They know how the disappointment, quite frankly, feels when you lose. And, when you've made it to that point and you don't win, it hurts. And now that you know what that feels like, you are going to do everything in your power to make sure that that does not happen again and that you do not have to feel that again.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as you said, they have these players who've been there before. Players like Jenner, for example, who've been in these massive games. They know how to get it done on the international stage, on the Olympic stage. Now it just kind of comes down to, something that I think means a lot to these players as well, even though it's not an Olympic gold medal. But I'm sure there are players on both teams who have insane resumes of world championship wins, college wins, Olympic gold medal wins, but that elusive Walter Cup, I think it just means that much more. I'm sure Poulin would feel that her career isn't her perfect career isn't finished if she doesn't have that championship.
Well, yeah, I mean, you work all season towards it, right? It's been a long season for them, probably one of the longer seasons that they've had in their careers in terms of pro careers. And this is what you've been working towards. So obviously you want to get to that point. And I think, for Poulin, she's probably carrying the whole team on her leg, on one leg, on her back. And she's going to do everything she can to try to get them to win. But it won't be easy.
Absolutely. Before we talk a little bit about what each team is going to need to do to get that win, let's talk about Montreal picking Minnesota. Obviously, it's easy to say now that picking Minnesota to play was the right choice. But after seeing the Boston-Ottawa series, to me, I feel like it was absolutely the right choice. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's hard, obviously, to look at it now because we can say, well, see how it turned out. But I think it makes sense logistically too. They got the worst travel out of the way in the semifinal. So they knew they wouldn't have to face that in the final if they made it there. And I don't know, to me, Minnesota, obviously Minnesota was the 3rd seed and Ottawa was the 4th, but I think everything was so close. They really couldn't go wrong either way. But obviously everything is in hindsight. It's easy to talk about now and say, yeah, that was the right choice.
Absolutely. I think the Ottawa team that showed up against Boston, would have had if they do show up exactly the same against Montreal. I think they have a great chance at raising that trophy in a couple weeks or a weekish from now. What do you think that Ottawa does have to do in order to come out on top in this series?
I think, one of the things that I was going to say, but Ottawa does not start the series at home, is taking advantage of that home ice, but they don't have home ice advantage. And so they won't be home until game 3. And obviously, you really have to win one of those first 2 games. Because if you go into that game 3 on home ice and you're down 2-0, like obviously you're not going to want to lose that third game on home ice, but you're in a pretty bad spot. So really, I think Ottawa just needs to focus on scoring across the lineup. They have some good depth, and I think that that's where their strength is, where it's not just the top line or the top D pairing who can contribute. It's across the roster.
Yeah, I agree. I think like Katarova is one of those players who really showed up last series. And speaking of players who read or watch things the Ice Garden puts out, one of the people we work with called her overrated in our superlatives article, and she probably read that and then showed up for the playoffs. But I mean, that's one of those players that like when she's on, and maybe she's not the person that you I mean, before the last series that you would expect to see on the scoreboard every night, but you're going to take that. And if she can keep doing that, like that will be, I think, really beneficial for them.
Yeah, absolutely. You get those other players to step up and have those big moments, and a goal here, an assist here, like that is the difference maker in playoffs, especially with a relatively short series.
Absolutely. And then on the flip side, what about Montreal? What do they got to do to win?
So Montreal, I think a lot of it is going to come down to rest and recovery. Ottawa's had a little bit more time off. Montreal really has not had time off, and it really has to go right back into it. Plus, having come out of an illness for some members of the team, it's a lot to ask in a short period of time to ask them to go from being sick to playing in the championship. And also just, the series itself, it's really like an every other day game. There's not a lot of time between games to recover. So focusing on, the stretching and the warm-ups and the things like that are going to be really important, obviously for both teams, but Montreal having had less rest.
Yeah, absolutely. Drink that vitamin C powder in
Yes.
every water bottle for sure. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, we don't really know a lot of details about what happened with that postponed game and the illness and stuff. And I don't really think that we should necessarily know, but, that is definitely something that I'm sure is still in play for some of those players. And even just injury wise, like we know Poulin is not 100%. She has been playing as like her best hockey that she can. But, Minnesota, I think, kind of noticed that weakness maybe from her. And they were often like trying to knock her down, things like that to kind of like remind her, that she's in pain. And so I'm not sure that Ottawa plays that same type of game, but that's definitely, I think, something, how do you monitor those minutes? How do you get other people to show up? Stacy, Rock, Dubois, those people who kind of show up in those big games. I mean, I think goaltending will be really interesting as well, even though Debian feels that every goalie is really good. Like, this is really like a series of goaltending lovers couldn't ask for anything better except maybe Frankel Debian final. Phillips just seems to go to like this whole other level in the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we saw it last year, right? Like they lost the final, but she was the MVP, and there was no question that she was their best player. And I think she's been Ottawa's best player in a lot of games this season, and it makes the difference. It's going to be really like I would not want to face either of those goalies in the playoffs. So having them both, I think it's kind of similar to what I expected for the Boston Ottawa series. Like not a lot of goals, and it's the screens in front of the net, because if the goalie can see it, they're probably going to stop it. Getting those little bounces and deflections, and if there's a rebound, being on top of it and being able to go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, the highlights are going to be insane based on like the saves Debian was making on Tuesday night, and
Yes.
Phillips is always good for a highlight reel save. It's honestly going to be so exciting. I think it's going to be really good hockey. I have a couple questions for you for top shelf predictions, but is there anything else you wanted to add about either team in this series?
I think Montreal just really, like, I know we talked about depth scoring for Ottawa, but I think that comes down to Montreal too, because you can't have Poulin being the only one scoring. Like, as much as she leads the team and she carries the team, you don't win a championship series based on one player. Like, it's just not going to happen. So,
Yeah,
other players have to get that and step up and find ways to make it happen.
absolutely agree. Yeah. I think, I mean, Debian was saying in the press conference today just that like Poulin really is the heart of the team, and there's nobody else they would want to lead them, and she can like get them to do things they've never done, and I think that they're going to have to, you know, respect that and show up for her to the level that she shows up for them if they want to witness. All right. So game 4 is next Wednesday night. We usually record this show on Wednesday night. So my first question for you is, do you think this series will be wrapped up by the next time that I record, or are we going to 5 games?
I think we're going to 5 games. I think these are two really good teams playing, their best hockey at this time of year. I think we're going to 5.
I agree with you. Even though it doesn't wrap up perfectly for the podcast, I'm always here for, game 5, like down to the wire action. Do you have any other predictions about what we might see between now and next week?
I think there's going to be at least one shutout game. And I think there's going to be at least one overtime game. And I think I think it'll be a scoreless overtime. Like, I think it'll be 0-0. So,
yeah. Awesome. Well, super exciting. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today. And everyone definitely should go check out your Vegas article that you're about to do. We're going to also have a lot of playoff coverage. We have started planning the coverage for the expansion process. The amount of articles that we are going to be churning out and content we're going to be churning out for you guys, definitely make sure that you're not going to miss it. Melissa, where else can people find you?
Yeah, everyone can find me on the site that I still call Twitter, aka X, at _ Melissa Burgess. But you can also follow my Substack, A Fresh Sheet, where I kind of dump some of my PWHL thoughts and what's happening in the league and quick recaps that you can get right to your email. There's free and paid subscriptions, and I appreciate all of the support everywhere.
Awesome. I'll leave those things linked down below. And then, yes, of course, if you are able to subscribe to the 9 Sports to read all of the work that we do and our amazing coworkers do, not just in hockey, but basketball, soccer, golf, literally everything. Definitely, we really appreciate that if you can, and we'll see you next week.